let's realize that our story has to have an opening panel. Just like every time you read a comic book, there is something that gives you the backstory. Or if you watch a series on Netflix, you get an intro that tells you what happened so far. As it happens, P1, Y1, they are our backstory. AS1, AD1, they are our backstory. So we are beginning with an origin story. Something has happened. History has happened. Technology has happened. Fed has happened. Budget has happened. This is kind of where we are. So the first way to think about P1 and Y1 as equilibrium points is that they are originary equilibrium. That's what they are. This is where I'm starting. Then something happened and it changes the story. So let's start with something happening on the demand side. It can't just be prices rose because that's already incorporated, and we already know that the only thing that explains this curve is wealth effects. Otherwise, if all prices rose, you wouldn't have a change. So something must have happened to change aggregate demand. The most classic thing that can happen to change aggregate demand is government policy. What if the government did something, because remember behind this is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. What if the government did something to change G, which we know by a multiplier effect will then also change C? So remember, every point here is an equilibrium point. So G changes, C will change. Or the government changes taxes. P changes, C will change, right? So something happened to policy or to economic structure, such as globalization, where say the WTO showed up and X minus M changed, right? So there's got to be something really fundamentally, structurally shifting decision making, and usually that's policy. If that happens, then you have an interesting situation. Let us say that we're coming out of COVID. We've been really not buying things. We've not had income. We haven't had jobs. We've been stuck at home. The economy is in recession. We are really nervous. And then the government comes along and says, hey, let's do something to recover. I am going to give you COVID benefits, or I am going to subsidize a green technology to help I'm going to do something to change one of those things. So the classic item that we are interested in here is actually policy. And this is going to matter because at the end of this quarter, you're going to give me some policies, right? Somebody does some policy that changes the parameters of this equation. And in this situation, let us say through green technology or through post-COVID support or debt relief, so that we are going to just make sure everybody can go to college, which will increase C, because going to college and spending money on education is part of C, right? We can do something. Housing subsidy, green technology, tax breaks, post-COVID support. You're in macro world now. You are in macro world. This is the budgetary world. This is the Federal Reserve world. It's the world where policy is shaping that entire thing. And of course, it can shape it in good ways and bad. Okay? Some people get really upset that the policy is focusing on X minus M. They view this as globalization that's losing our jobs. Some people are really interested in whether or not the government is doing something to shift investment in a green tech direction, so that we can get new planned investment that's going to solve our ecological crisis. Some people are worried about equity, and they're like, is the government helping me pay for my healthcare and education and housing, right? C, I, X minus M. Some people are like, we need stronger military, let's increase that military budget, G, right? It could be anywhere. If the government does something, that's the classic thing. The other things that can shift this is expectations, assumptions about the future, but really it's usually policies by the government that's changing structural parameters. Then C plus I plus G plus X minus M that lies behind this curve is going to shift, and at each price level, hear this word, not at each price, but at each price level, consumers will spend more. So if the price level today was P1, if I was spending Y1, I'm going to try and spend more. And maybe I'm spending more and it's way past YF. It's beyond what I can afford. Maybe it's less. It just depends on the extent of the shift. But what's going to happen is a combination of things. As I spend more, some of this will result in an increase in my GDP. This is the counter-cyclical policies you've learned of. The policies where we are trying to increase our level of output, and remember, behind Y1, Y2 is a level of employment. We're going to come back to that. How many people we're hiring, right? So, some of what my government does will result in more people getting jobs, more spending, better for business, better for consumers, better for workers. Win-win. But it depends on how close I am to full employment. If I'm really close to full employment, my government's policy will result more in inflation, price increase, P2, and not so much in job creation. But if I'm in the flatter portion here, if I'm pretty far from full employment, I've got a lot of unemployment, what that will mean is when the government stimulates the economy, causing aggregate demand to go out, then the result will be I will have more output, I will have more production, therefore I will have more employment. But I can increase my employment without forcing wages up. Because you've got a lot of unemployment, think about it. People don't have jobs, you start creating jobs, wages are not going to run up. People are just going to take the jobs, right? You're going to be in the flatter portion of your aggregate supply curve, because remember, behind this AS curve, sticky wages. So, what that means is the lower my level of production compared to full employment, government policy that stimulates the economy will generate a lot of increase in production, good increase in employment. It's going to take me closer and closer to my PPF. I was below the PPF. I'm now going to go up closer to it. and it's not going to result in a lot of inflation. But if I am pretty close to full employment, then when the government stimulates the economy, what's going to happen is that I will have some increase in production, some increase in employment, but I'm already pretty close to full employment. If I'm already close to full employment, then people are going to ask for higher wages. And as wages go up, most of the effect will be captured by inflation, higher prices, as compared to employment, more people getting jobs. So what you're seeing on the demand side here is what is called the classic trade-off between inflation and employment. Every time you are pretty close to full employment, then when you stimulate the economy, you'll get inflation. And that's the moment where the Fed says, inflation, inflation, inflation. Let us raise interest rates. Let us hold back stimulus. Let us dampen demand. Let's actually try and push this curve that we think is far too close to full employment. Push it back, because then, yes, we will lose some growth, and yes, we will lose some jobs. But our aim is, as we dampen job creation, wages will flatten. And if wages flatten, then we will not have inflation. So here is the final piece on the demand side. For demand management, this is something hard to realize, but the reality is that what people are trying to do is balance an issue that's under equity. How many people do you want to lose their jobs so that prices do not rise for firms? That's behind this. If you think the biggest problem you face is inflation and firms should never feel higher costs, then you will absolutely promote firing people, reduce output, reduce employment, because the moment you do that, then people don't have jobs, wages want to go up. If on the other hand you prioritize equity, then you're going to ask yourself, are there ways in which we actually need to either stimulate employment or find other ways to maintain wages? Tax and spend, budget policy, remember? Or social safety nets, such as healthcare, housing, whatever, so that we help people if we are generating unemployment as a matter of policy. So it's very hard to realize unemployment is actually generated through policy, but that is what this model is telling you, that you have to make a choice. You can't get it all. You can't get high productivity, high employment, and low prices. Demand management means, that's one policy, demand management, which is the classic policy, increase CIG X minus M, change interest rates so that you increase CIG X minus M, do globalization so you increase CIG X minus M. Demand management is all about adjusting that aggregate demand curve, which means your policy is telling you you have to make a political choice.